We have all been there. The invitation has been made to us. We have been asked to go along to a social function. And we know that it is lovely to have been invited along, right? But we also know that we have no interest in being there. None whatsoever. Maybe it's because we don't like crowds. Or maybe it's because we just don't like people in general. Or maybe it's because we have no time for that one individual who is going to be there too. Whatever the reason, we just know that we have no interest in accepting the invitation that has been made. Now, as we all sit here this morning and reminisce over the times that we have actually been in that situation ourselves, we know that the very simplest thing to do would be to politely decline the invitation, to simply but assertively say, no thank you. But we are humans, and nothing is ever that simple, right? We sometimes feel the need to explain ourselves, and so, in a situation like this, rather than offer a polite decline, we instead feel the need to offer an excuse, a reason, which may or may not be entirely made up. I'm sorry, I can't join you that night. I can't get a babysitter. I'm sorry, I can't be there that evening. I'm washing my hair. I'm sorry, I can't be there. My in-laws are coming to visit. Excuses, excuses, excuses. Of course, there are the classic excuses out there too, aren't there? Think about those times in school when you said something like this. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't bring in my homework, sir. You see, the dog ate it. Our kids are masters at excuses. They have this innate ability to shift blame from themselves and onto someone else, maybe quite often their parents. Another school excuse may be something like this. Oh, I'm sorry I was late for school today, miss. My parents didn't wake me up on time. We all have excuses for all kinds of things, and we love to use them. Sometimes they are true, and sometimes they are not. It's okay to admit it. We are in this series now where we are looking at all of the times that Jesus says the words, "Follow me." Today we have read the second of 5 instances in Matthew's Gospel where Jesus uses these words. And last week when we spoke to you, we said that in this series we would be taken to some of those texts in the Gospels that are a wee bit difficult to comprehend at first glance. This is certainly one of those texts. Matthew chapter 8 is filled with stories that display the supernatural power of Jesus to heal illnesses, to cast out demons, even to calm storms. Our reading seems a little off theme compared to the rest of this chapter. You see, in Matthew chapter 8, it's a case of miracle story, miracle story, miracle story, follow me story, miracle story, miracle story. Our reading just doesn't seem to fit, except to maybe explain why those crowds are gathering around Jesus at the beginning of verse 18. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Jesus is doing some pretty amazing and miraculous stuff. Word is spreading about him throughout the region, and crowds are gathering to see what's really going on, what it's all about. They've been wowed. They've been impressed. They are enthralled with what they are seeing Jesus do. And therefore, it only makes sense that they would like to get in on this by becoming followers of Jesus. I mean, that rings true, doesn't it? Any of us would be impressed if we were seeing Jesus doing the things that he is doing right here in Matthew chapter 8. The first scribe comes up to Jesus and boldly asserts his willingness to go wherever Jesus is going to go. And Jesus rightly assesses that this would-be disciple has really not done his sums. He has been impressed, of course. He is eager and he wants to be a follower of Jesus. But he really has no clue what that is going to involve. He has no clue that being a follower of Jesus means following Jesus all the way to Jerusalem, to Golgotha, Gethsemane, even to the tomb. You see, it's not all healings and miraculous signs and wonders with Jesus. There are going to be tough times. There is going to be suffering along the way too. Becoming a disciple of Jesus is free for sure, but that doesn't mean that following Jesus has no cost. Foxes have holes and the birds of the air have their nests, he says, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Last week we were mentioning that the invitation to follow Jesus is akin to Jesus saying something like, "Come on, follow me." This week, Jesus is still saying the same thing, but to this scribe, he is also asking whether or not he is really willing to follow Jesus, even through the more difficult parts of that journey. But then another individual comes up to Jesus. This one is described by Matthew as a disciple, meaning that he has already decided to follow Jesus, said yes to following Christ, but it would appear that now he needs to back out. "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Now, to you and to me, this is of course a very natural and understandable request. I mean, when we get that call from our family, we go, right? In our age and context, after we have had a death in the family, there is time for us to gather before we have a memorial or a committal service. For us, we do not consider it a big deal to ask someone to give us time and space to gather with our families after the passing of a loved one. But Matthew, the gospel writer, well, he's not writing in our age or for our world. In the first century Middle Eastern context, when a death occurred, family would gather immediately to have a funeral procession to the tomb. And by immediately, I mean the very same day. This disciple was likely not asking for a day or two to slip home and attend to the ritual needs of the family as we might know them, before then coming back to continue life with Jesus. So what was he asking for? Well, there are a couple of possibilities here. The first is this. It's the possibility that the disciple's father has not yet actually died, and that the disciple is therefore asking Jesus if he can hold off on following Jesus until such times as his father has passed away, which could be months, it could be years. It's true that as a son in this context, this disciple would have had familial obligations to attend to. This disciple is essentially asking if Jesus is okay with him holding off on following for a while he attends to those familial obligations. Second is the possibility that the father has actually died and that this disciple was obligated to a tradition known as second burial. In this tradition, the eldest son in a family would return home a year after the death of their loved one, and they would literally give them a second burial, gathering up the remains of the deceased body, stacking them neatly in a container, and placing them into a niche in the wall. If this was the case, then the disciple was asking Jesus for permission to hold off from following the Lord for up to a year until he could complete this ritual of the second burial. Whether it is possibility number one or possibility number two, the disciple wants to place his discipleship on hold. He wants to put something ahead of the priority of following Jesus. And even though we might think that it is scandalous, Jesus refuses. "Follow me," he says. "Let the dead bury their own dead." I know. I know. It sounds awfully harsh. right? Why on earth would Jesus say such a thing? Now, most commentators agree that Jesus' first intention here was not harshness, but rather he was seeking out the level of commitment that these would-be disciples would ultimately have. Think about it for just a second with me. When you are putting your team together in any context, you want to know that your team members are going to be in there with you. You want to know that when the going gets tough, that your team aren't going to desert you or to run off to pastures that seem greener. Jesus is performing miraculous signs and wonders, left, right, and center. People are flocking to see him, and many of them are displaying an initial excitement and eagerness to go all in and follow him. But the last thing that Jesus wants is a squad of followers whose commitment may be a mile wide but is only an inch deep. Jesus isn't being harsh here. He is simply doing his bit to ensure that those who would follow him know that there is going to be a cost to it, and that they know that there are no excuses when it comes to where we are to place Christ in our list of life priorities. We cannot say, "Not today, Jesus, I'm washing my hair." We cannot say, "Not today, Jesus, I've got company coming into town." If we want to follow Christ, then all that we can say to Jesus day in and day out is yes. What about when the journey is tough? Well, we still say yes. What about when our other obligations are vying for our first attention? You know what? We still say yes. What about when it's going to cost me something? We still say yes. Friends, there are no excuses. We simply say yes to Jesus and we follow. And as we do, we learn again and again as we take our steps along the way that in Christ we always have enough to keep on going. We have enough joy. We have enough resilience, enough fortitude, enough resources, enough energy, enough healing, enough grace. In Christ, there will always be enough, my friends. Always. So, with all of that being said, here's my question to you today. What's your excuse for holding back? What's keeping you from following Jesus today? What is that thing that you feel obligated to? What is that thing at the top of your priority list that is stopping you right now in this moment from giving your yes to Jesus? Whatever it is, it's time to lay it down. And it's time to trust in Christ that there will always be enough of all that you need. If you have been stalled in your journey of late, and many of us have been by this pandemic experience, if you've been pulling out your best excuses as to why you cannot continue to follow Jesus, then today is a great day to lay that down. So I ask you again, church, who's in?